You're listening to the Jōrni Podcast. What if freedom from alcohol opens doors you never knew existed? Stay tuned to find out more. This episode contains adult subject matter and some listeners may be triggered by this content. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, I'm Petra Brunbauer, and with decades of experience with sadness, pain, anxiety, and stress, I finally figured out how to leave all that behind. And this podcast shows you how to break free permanently so you can reclaim your sanity and find the self-esteem and energy to go after the life you desire. With real talk about mental health, holistic healing, and the tough journey of coming out the other end. This is the Jōrni Podcast. Welcome to today's episode. Many of us have a complicated relationship with alcohol, often not realizing how it impacts our lives. This episode dives into the journey of leaving alcohol behind, exploring the surprising benefits and challenges that come with this impactful change. Our guest shares her personal transformation from having a daily wine o'clock habit to embracing an alcohol-free life. We discuss the societal pressures around drinking, strategies for navigating social situations without alcohol, and the unexpected ways life can improve when you step away from drinking. Whether you're sober curious or simply interested in understanding different perspectives on alcohol use, this conversation offers insights into making powerful, positive changes in your life, no rock bottom required. Sarah Williamson is a coach, mentor, trainer, expert speaker, and best-selling author of Drink Less, Live Better. She decided to take a break from alcohol in 2019 for 1 year and hasn't gone back to it. She spent 15 years working with people addressing their substance use and misuse before actually addressing her own wine o'clock habit and realizing how much better she felt without it. Sarah believes you don't need a rock bottom to make a powerful and positive change in your life. Let's meet Sarah Williamson. Hi, Sarah. It's so great to have you on the podcast today. I've been looking forward to getting to chat with you because leaving alcohol behind is such a powerful topic for today's conversation. And as we've just chatted about, something that you might have a little bit of a different perspective on that is so fascinating. So I really look forward to chatting about this. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here with you today.
Yeah, it's my absolute pleasure. I feel like you have so much wisdom and information that people need to hear about. So let's share that with the world today. And for starters, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of where your story started, how you came to do what you do today? And obviously the episode will be about alcohol. So let our listeners know what it is that you do today so they can understand what we'll be talking about.
Thank you so much. I suppose the very short version is that I work as a sober coach and I help people who are looking at changing their relationships with alcohol. Mostly my clients are sort of in midlife. They're kind of from their 40s and upwards, but not exclusively, a couple younger than that. And I guess the long version story is how I came to be doing this work. And it really goes way back. It goes back to starting drinking probably around the age of 14 or so. I grew up here in the UK in a small village in the home counties, the kind of village where there was no local shop but 2 pubs. And my parents drank in one pub and then all the kids and young people drank and worked in another pub. And it wasn't anything particularly out of the ordinary. I would say now the licensing laws are a lot stricter and you really would be much less likely to get 14-year-olds hanging around in a pub, but then it definitely felt different. I drank probably at the weekends, and perhaps not every weekend, but from sort of 14 onwards, and occasionally hung out in the park with my friends, and we might have drunk what we perhaps pinched from our parents' booze cabinets, or if someone was older and had managed to get to the off license, perhaps that. I went to university when I was 18 and had what I would then describe as a very typical British university experience around alcohol, which definitely involved drinking probably more nights of the week than not. Big student nights always involved heavily discounted alcohol, and the student union always had special offers on whichever drinks were being sold cheaply on that night of the week. And I would say I made full use of all of those student discounts. My student drinking did probably towards the end of my degree become, well, certainly slightly less than ideal. I lived with 4 rugby playing men who were all 6 foot tall and 6 foot wide. And it was part of the narrative at the time that the girls could do the same as the boys, and we didn't draw the line at drinking. So there was a phrase that was around drinking each other under the table. In the UK at the time, there was very much this focus on what was called the ladette culture. And definitely the magazines of the late 90s and early 2000s were showing women going out and having the same type of night out as men might historically have had. And I definitely got sucked into all of that. My girlfriends and I were fully committed. I'm not entirely sure we would have said at the time that we were absolutely ladettes, but we were very conscious that that was part of what was going on around us. After I left university, I started work in London and I had a fabulous job. And the mantra was, we work hard and play hard. And I think most people know that that is a euphemism, that we work hard and then we drink a lot rather than play hard. Let me tell you, there was no playing tennis, or that was not the kind of playing we were doing. It was big nights out after work. And I certainly made the most of enjoying that London lifestyle through my early 20s. I met my husband when I was 25. We got married really quite quickly after we met, and then had our 2 boys really soon after that. My drinking in that time period tailed off completely. Certainly when I was pregnant or breastfeeding, I didn't drink at all. And I didn't think anything of it either. I didn't want to be drinking. It just felt like a complete non-issue. But I did have a period where I really reflected on what drinking had looked like up until that point in my life. And I would say I had had periods of binge drinking and also periods of not drinking much, but perhaps it might have been a glass of wine with dinner midweek, or it might have been just if I was out with my husband. And I sort of had various patterns, I suppose, of drinking over the years. And when my boys were really small, when I went back to drinking, I say really small, probably when they were toddlers, my girlfriends and I started getting together and having our sort of girls' nights either out locally or round at each other's houses. And I think one of the things around that time, now I look back on it, was around that massive identity shift that I really actually struggled with. I had gone from working in a really responsible job, enjoying having a big team of people, having budgets to spend, to being at home full time with these 2 tiny children, and so much had changed. And I had thought that I was going to go back to my old job and do what I did before on a part-time basis, and it hadn't worked out like that. And I think I really had a massive crisis of confidence. My self-esteem was a bit crushed. We all know that children don't come with instruction manuals, so I was perhaps floundering around a bit and not quite understanding what I was doing, and things were so different than how they'd been before. So my girlfriends and I, we really used to let off some steam on a Friday night. And what we would do was gather together, give the kids an early dinner, feed them, and then our husbands would swing by and collect the kids on the way home from work, and we'd sort of carry on. We'd open the Prosecco or pour the gin or whatever it was. And I think at that time, part of what we perhaps got swept along in a bit was this narrative of it's wine o'clock somewhere and hurrah for gin, and this is mummy's grape juice, and all of these little wooden signs you can buy for your kitchen. It's time to dance on the table and drink champagne, or the fridge magnets, all of those birthday cards. You try and buy a 40th, a 30th birthday card without gin on the front or champagne on the front. It's really actually incredibly hard. I think so much had just been taken for granted in terms of this is how we cope in life. Something is difficult, something is challenging, something feels overwhelming. We pour ourselves a glass of white wine or a G&T or whatever, and perhaps that will take away some of the overwhelm, some of the pain. It will numb you out slightly. So through that time period when the boys were little, it felt like alcohol was really used for injecting some fun, some unpredictability, a bit of a highlight in the week. And looking back, I do regret some of that, just because I can see that I was really emotionally unavailable for my kids in those periods of time. And particularly if I were to think about having a hangover on a Sunday morning or a Saturday morning, a tiny child and a hangover are one of the worst combinations that you can possibly think of. And my tiny children got up really early in the morning as well. So actually, I was not giving my boys the best of myself during that time period. And I was doing it in the name of fun and relaxation, which all felt conflicting. And I really struggled to unpick it. And I remember one day, it would have been a Friday evening at about, let's say, 9 o'clock. My husband and I just sat down on the sofa. I'd poured a glass of wine. And at this point, the children would have been about, let's say, I don't know, 9 and 10, something like that. Maybe it wasn't quite as late as 9 o'clock at night. And I remember having this moment where I thought, oh, I have got everything from my wildest dreams. I took that really deep breath and I thought, everything here is magical. I'm married to such a lovely man and I've got these 2 boys. Here we are in our lovely house in this beautiful town near the countryside with a dog. This is everything I ever could have hoped and wished for. And the thought that came straight on the back of that was, I wonder why I am drinking this glass of wine and trying to numb out the things that actually look so good. And in that moment, I knew that something probably was going to be different. I couldn't have told you exactly what it was, but that was certainly the first moment where the conflict felt like it needed to be untangled. I recognised, I suppose I was on the point at which I was starting to recognise some of my drinking was around not having a handle on feeling overwhelmed, having too much to do. I'd gone back to work. By that point, I was working in a completely different career and loving it, but it was all consuming. And then as the kids got a bit older, I was certainly starting to pay more attention to what I wanted in my life, both physically and emotionally. I'd started to do all of the drinking green smoothies, running my 5K runs, doing my yoga, remembering to take my supplements. And at some point I thought, oh, I'm adding in all of this extra stuff, which is taking time and money and energy. But I wonder what it'd be like if I actually cut one thing out. I wonder what would happen if instead of thinking to myself in the morning, oh, that's a shame, I'm feeling a bit foggy-headed or a bit under the weather because I had a glass of wine last night, what would it feel like to take that wine out completely and see what happened? So that was certainly the time that I began to think that change was coming. And then in 2017, I came to the conclusion I was going to do something different. For sure, I really was. And it still took me another 2.5 years to actually get to that point of starting, which happened in 2019. But what I would say to you happened in that 2.5 year period was everything that I needed to educate myself with, the idea that I could moderate my drinking, that I became the kind of person who could go out for a night out with her girlfriends and drink 2 glasses of wine and come home, not leave my phone in the back of the taxi, not leave my jacket in the pub, There were no consequences that were affecting anyone else. I was present with my kids, enjoying my relationship, all was good in the world. But I was definitely experimenting and finding out the impact that alcohol had by being very conscious around what I was drinking. And I eventually arrived at the idea that towards the end of 2019, I was going to do a 1-year experiment without alcohol, in which then I'd be completely alcohol free, see what it looked like. I'd know by the end of that year whether I was either going to go back to drinking in some format or another, or whether I was going to stay stopped. But I didn't need to think about it at that point. I could just go ahead and run the experiment. And the, I suppose, ironic thing around it was that by that time I'd been working probably nearly 10 years, maybe a bit longer, in a role. I was working in youth justice. I was coaching and mentoring young people all day long, and most of the work that I was doing was around their substance use and misuse. And I guess I'd always had in my mind, of course, the young people I was working with might have been drinking, but more often than not, their substances might have been something different. And I had managed to draw a line in my mind around the fact that what I was drinking was available for sale in the supermarket, and therefore perfectly socially acceptable, versus what other substance you might be using that perhaps are not available on your supermarket shelf. So the point at which I started to realise that some of the conversations I was having with people at work made perfect sense if I applied them to myself. And that's really how I got to the point of starting that experiment and going into it open-minded, thinking to myself, we'll just see where this goes. I already knew that I could run a month-long period of time in my life without drinking because I had done dry Januaries before and sober Octobers. So a month didn't seem like a challenge, but a year felt like it might be, because it would involve the birthdays and the christenings and the weddings and the music festivals. I knew I'd have to go into those things and enjoy them without alcohol and see how they felt. And I'm so glad that I did it. I'm so glad I took that leap into a year. And here I am more than 4.5 years later, and I absolutely have not gone back to drinking.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that with us, Sarah. And there are so many interesting things to kind of break out that you just shared with us. And two that really stick out for me is the idea that you can use alcohol as a coping mechanism to numb certain things, as a way to deal with the things that you maybe don't want to deal with, or the things that are too much to deal with. So that's an interesting thought, that we can choose alcohol as part of how we cope with life because we feel we need that. And the second bit is that it doesn't have to be this black and white idea, because I always looked at it as either you're drinking or you're not drinking. But the fact that you're mentioning, well, I could be mindful about that, or I could decide later to go back to it, that there are very many levels to alcohol consumption, or how we choose to have alcohol present in our lives. So very, very interesting insights that you shared with us there. And interesting that you didn't go back to drinking. So I'll start with that. And what did you notice that was different about your health, your mental health, emotions, physical impact? How did that year go, and what did you feel after?
Probably the quickest benefits felt like they were the physical benefits. Really quickly after I stopped drinking, I noticed myself sleeping a lot better. And I wouldn't have told you before that I didn't sleep well. So interestingly, being able to, I suppose one of the things about drinking is that you tend to fall into a very deep sleep very quickly, and your sleep is not so restorative. Being able to recognise really quickly that I was waking up feeling very well rested and ready for the day ahead, not needing my alarm clock like I might have done beforehand. I was definitely at a point before I stopped drinking where I was wondering whether I was going to go to the doctor and have a conversation about brain fog. And certainly I was starting to feel a little bit anxious about some of the things in my life. And I was really surprised to find out that once I stopped drinking, actually, probably some of what was going on for me was directly attributable to drinking. And by the time I had stopped drinking, I was really actually drinking very little by that point. The, I suppose, final habit I got rid of was drinking one G&T on a Thursday night. That was my sort of, when I got in from work, thing that I liked to do. That was the last habit to go, if you like. But actually, even a small amount of alcohol does have an impact on you. I certainly noticed that my choices as far as nutrition and hydration got so much better so quickly. I had been someone who had always really enjoyed in the mornings, and not because of a hangover, just because the way that I happened to have eaten was somebody who really enjoyed a lot of carbs in the morning. I enjoyed loads of tea, loads of coffee, and actually making it nutritional swaps became really quite easy. It didn't take any effort at all to be a bit more mindful about recognizing what my body really wanted and needed. So an example for that would be around the idea when I was driving home from work, I would quite often want to get home, want to pour a glass of wine or a gin and tonic early evening, and not recognizing that part of that was about being incredibly thirsty and hungry. So part of the drink thing was around getting a sugar hit. Well, actually, mid-afternoon, if you drink a pint of water and a really nutritious protein-rich snack, actually you don't get home feeling absolutely ravenous and thirsty. So it was about making tweaks like that that really helped me. I think I had at the time, and it's really difficult thinking sort of the age that I was then, I was early 40s, thinking about which bits might have been hormonal, which bits might have been driven by other things. But certainly I was prone to some breakouts in my skin, and that all went away completely. Emotionally, I would say to you, I went from somebody who I may or may not have been experiencing different types of feelings at any particular point in a week, but I went to being somebody who more often than not felt calm, felt fine, felt okay. I think my description would be something around, it was really, really easy to access those sort of middle contentment feelings. Alcohol, whether we like it or not, it is a depressant. Although it might give you a momentary spike, 20 minutes in, that first drink that you take, the sugar and the alcohol has an impact. It will always have the opposite effect and a more negative impact at some point further down the line, whether that is in an hour or so's time or whether it is the next morning. As a society, we really, really like to deny the idea that alcohol is a toxin. The labelling is so pretty. It might say drink aware or drink sensibly or whatever on an advert, but alcohol is so often pushed at us, whether it's the movies, the TV, the advertising, the newspaper, in the supermarket. It's made to look attractive. And I would describe it as very prettily packaged poison, if we're going to be super honest about it. Along with the physical and emotional benefits that I really did start to feel quite early on, I recognised that I was going to need sustaining through the year. It's great if you have all those things as pluses that you can tick off early on and you think, great, this is giving me motivation. This is helping me to feel like I'm not white knuckling it or that I'm torturing myself. I would then say I started to recognise the more spiritual benefits. And I really did get to a point where I'd have told you the year before that I was not somebody who could meditate, that I was not somebody who could sit still and journal. I was always too much going on in my head or too busy or whatever. And it really helped me to find a bit of stillness and peace. And actually, that's the thing that I would say to you, I was most delighted and surprised to find. I hadn't recognised that alcohol was one of the things that was shutting down certain parts of me, how I operate as a human being. I would say that I had different shifts throughout that year. So something that felt like a big benefit earlier on, I might just have got used to after a while. And I almost took for granted the fact that I was going to sleep well, because I just knew that I would be sleeping well. And it was when I hit things like weddings or music festivals or days at the races that it felt as if I had to prepare myself a bit for those and keep those benefits in mind, almost as a reminder to keep on this straight and narrow path, for want of a better word.
That's very curious that you say that, so that it kind of dampens some of the parts that might keep us engaged in life, I guess. And did you feel that you had a lot of support with this? Because you mentioned before that you used to go out with your girlfriends and kind of blow off some steam. So when you decided to not drink anymore for that year, was that something that your friends and family supported you in, or did you feel judged for making that decision?
It was a real mixture. Full disclosure is there was one really good friend that I lost, definite, and that is a sad truth of how it panned out. It turned out after a certain period of time, having tried to connect in other ways and on different things, the thing that we really did have in common was drinking together. And actually there wasn't a lot more to it. It was superficial and surface level. And so now I would say to you, okay, well, that was a loss that I am okay with, but at the time it did hurt. And one other friend now, who I would say to you 4.5 years in, I think she would say she doesn't quite understand. I think she would say, if she was sitting in the room with us now, that she doesn't understand why I had to be so extreme in as much as doing a year's experiment. She would say that was not a normal thing. And we're still great friends, and that is okay. My girlfriends that live locally, that I used to spend probably most amount of time out drinking with, over the last few years, we've kind of changed how we hang out together. And I suppose in part it has been to do with me, although I wouldn't say that I'm taking any credit for it. It has felt like a group shift rather than because of a decision that I've made. In the very early days, I was different with different people. So some people, I would say to them, oh, I'm just not drinking today because I'm going to go out for a run early tomorrow morning. And I would almost sort of, not for a single second saying you have to make an excuse, but I would make an excuse because I perhaps didn't want to be questioned or get into a conversation about it. There were people who I might have said early on, oh yes, I'm doing a month of not drinking. That's easy to do in January. Lots of people do a dry January. And then when I got into February, I just would say, oh, what, I've really enjoyed not drinking last month. I'm just carrying on for a bit longer. I think there were probably only 2 people that I told I am going to do a whole year. And of course, I ended up having random conversations with people as well. I'd find myself in a restaurant saying to a waitress, oh, yes, could I have, I don't know, an alcohol-free gin and tonic, please? Yes, I'm not drinking at the moment because blah, blah, and end up giving a random stranger a huge long story that was completely unnecessary. And I think it's that thing that often we think other people are more interested than they actually are. So definitely I had times when I over-explained myself, and definitely I had times where I did not want to explain myself. And also, of course, the truth of it is we don't owe anybody any part of our story, and we just end up thinking we need to tell people when perhaps we don't want to do that. So I would say that most of my friends were, if they were supportive, some of them did not quite understand, and that was okay. My husband, absolutely supportive, but he drinks, and he was never about to say, great idea, I'll do that at the same time as you. And my wider family were fine with it as well. So it felt like I had a bit of a mixed bag, and that was okay because I knew where I could go for a bit of TLC if I needed it. And I knew sort of who not to try to lean on, who might not be able to give me what I might have needed at a moment in time.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that. My family is Bavarian and we're known for beer, and I'm the only non-drinker in the family. So when we go for dinner and I order tea, I usually get very funny looks from the waiters and that. But it is just something that I got used to it. And my family is also, they know about it. So that's not a big deal anymore. But I can definitely understand going through that, how that would make you feel like you need to justify that choice to other people who, like you said, probably don't even care what you're choosing to drink, but it feels like you need to be saying something for that. So yeah, that's a very interesting insight. You decided to have this year away from alcohol. Is this possible for everyone? Because there are people that have an addictive personality that are struggling with moderating alcohol, where it might not be possible to say, A, I'm going to quit cold turkey, or B, I can actually handle the fact that I choose how much I'll be drinking at any given time. So when you work with clients, what's your experience with that? Is this kind of choosing or moderation possible for everyone?
Yeah, I would say it definitely is not possible for everyone. And I would certainly say, so for a start, I am not qualified as a doctor. And absolutely for people, if a medical detox is required, residential rehab or some outpatient program, whatever is appropriate, that is absolutely what somebody must do. And I would never for a single second say anything other than that. And that kind of professional medical intervention is what is needed for people who have got to the point where they are physically dependent on alcohol. Our bodies get physically dependent on it. And the worst possible thing in the world would be cold turkey. The consequences of that could be death. Let's not beat around the bush. Could be the tragic consequence of it. So I'm really mindful about people choosing the right pathway to their recovery that they need. I would also say that moderation is not a thing that everybody can head out and achieve. There are people who would say right up front, I'm an alcoholic, I have an addictive personality, I've been addicted to alcohol in the past or whatever it is. And they not only would say that they couldn't moderate their alcohol consumption, they also would not want to. There would be no desire around that. And I suppose that's a little bit where I come from around the idea of not drinking now. I see alcohol for what it is and that it is a poison for my body. Why would I want to drink it? I know I could go out tomorrow, drink one glass of wine and not drink anything again for 6 months. And I don't want to drink one glass of wine because it's not good for you. That idea that even though I could moderate, I've now chosen not to, feels like a good choice for me. But people need to come to their own conclusions. So very definitely, I see that drinking less is a possibility. I see that giving yourself some rules that you know that you can stick to that help you feel really joyful about drinking in what feels to you like exactly the right amount, then you go for it. So I suppose an example for that I might give is someone who says to me, right, I'm thinking about being sober. I'm thinking about an alcohol-free life. I know that actually I don't want it in my life anymore because it's causing X, Y, Z consequences for me. But my best friend is getting married next year. So I cannot contemplate not toasting the bride and groom without a glass of champagne. Now, what that could do is keep somebody stuck for another year until the wedding comes. And so they carry on drinking exactly as they're drinking because they're waiting for that start date in the future. Well, an alternative way to look at that is, look, if that wedding is in a year's time, why don't 12 months of tapering down, cutting out, being sober up until the point of the wedding, perhaps you do have that glass of fizz on that wedding day and it feels like you've done what is right for you and for the occasion, and then you carry on from the day afterwards. Or perhaps what happens is you get to that day and suddenly think to yourself, actually, now I'm really used to celebrating things. I'm used to enjoying things without alcohol because guess what? It's about the occasion. It's about the atmosphere. It's about being surrounded by people you love. Those are the things that are really good about the occasion. It actually doesn't matter what's in your glass. So you might get there and decide you're not going to have a drink anyway, in which case, what fabulous news it's been that you've already done that big stretch of not drinking beforehand. And it's really easy in life for us to find all of those, what will I do at Christmas? What will I do at the music festival stories that we could tell ourselves. But part of the truth for me has been actually about finding out the activities that I truly do and don't enjoy. And if you are somebody who needed a drink to enjoy that activity in the first place, maybe that activity isn't quite the right thing for you. And I would also tell you that one of the things that I know about myself that I did not know 5 years ago is that I'm a really happy introvert. That 5 years ago, if we'd have met and had a conversation, or we'd been out for a night out, you might have described me as the life and soul of the party, the first on the dance floor, the last one ordering the tequila shots, the one organising the nights out. And actually all of that was around, yes, surrounding myself with people and having what looked like a good time and having some drinks and some fun. But I now recognise that I never really was that extrovert. I was doing an act of being an extrovert. It's so much easier to enjoy the activities that I really love and enjoy with the people I love and enjoy. And it just doesn't matter that alcohol isn't a part of it.
And at the end of the night, you actually remember the activities that you've done, which is another bonus. So.
Yes, and you're so right. And the added level to that as well is about your relationships with other people. So 5 years ago, a girls' night out might have involved somebody saying something about something that was going on in their life, something that was perhaps difficult to deal with, or they were struggling to navigate, something that was feeling heavy for whatever reason. And as a friendship group on a night out, we might have chatted about it and analysed it, dissected it, and then either forgotten about it or certainly not necessarily come back round to check in with that person. And now, if we are going for a beautiful walk together on a Saturday afternoon where we're walking the dogs, we're covering 20 kilometres, we're stopping at a nice tea shop and having a piece of cake, actually the conversations now are the ones where we do remember to check back in with each other and say, oh, do you remember that thing you were telling us about last time? How is that going now? Did anything happen? Are you okay with it? And that is such a gift, being able to really bring your attention and your time to conversations with people you care about.
Yeah, that's a good point of having that sense of being more anchored in the moment and being present with all those feelings and things that are happening. How would that look like for clients that are using alcohol as a coping mechanism? Do you find that they then have to replace that with something, or how do you work with them on if they say, well, I have a really stressful job, or my relationship is not what I want it to be, or I have financial troubles and I drink because that helps me not worry about that. So how do you work with them on actually moving forward from that?
Yeah, and certainly that is true. Very often what looks like or sounds like it's going to be a big unpicking around alcohol, the alcohol bit actually tends to happen really early on up front, and what we uncover on the other side is either something in a relationship or deep unhappiness at work, or actually something other than the presenting problem. So that very often is a big part of what goes on for people. One part of it in the early days is definitely around emotional regulation. A part of that might be a piece around distraction. Let's say, for example, this is an example of something that happened to me early on. I might say to somebody, oh, at 6 o'clock in the evening, I really struggle. That's the time at which there's a little voice in my head saying, go on, just pour one glass of wine. You're not blowing up your relationship or driving drunk or losing your job or anything. What possible harm could it do? And somebody else might say to me, oh, at 6 o'clock, I always do half an hour's yoga practice, or I go for a walk around the block, or I light a scented candle, or I get in the bath or whatever. And these are great ideas as distractions. But the truth of it is, in that moment where I was looking for that distraction, what I was not saying out loud to anybody is that I am really lonely. And I didn't want anybody to know about my loneliness because I felt huge shame around it. And I didn't want anybody to say to me, but how can you be lonely? You live in your house with your lovely husband and your 2 teenage children, and you've got loads of friends. Of course you're not lonely. But the truth is that I was feeling incredibly isolated and lonely. And if somebody suggests to me then, or I have the idea that I'm going to hop in the bath, after I've had that bath, all I'm going to tell you is then I am wet and still lonely. I have not done anything to address the thing that was behind the thing. So very often a piece of work that I'm doing with my client is understanding what those drivers are. What were the things that alcohol was bringing them? And it is very rarely one answer. So loneliness might be one of them, overwhelm might be one of them, and there might be a whole range of other things in between. And I think as a society, we do that thing when things are amazingly brilliant and also shockingly hideous, whether it's a funeral or the other end of the spectrum, a wedding or whatever. We're saying, right, let's have a glass of whatever with it. Well, the truth is that alcohol can never add anything to either of those types of situations. So it is about addressing what you either need for comfort or what you need to feel better about a situation. What are the tools? What are the strategies? What do you need? And of course, the answer to that is different for everybody. So I've got various different either models or things that we talk about, stories that we tell. So much of the work that I do is around really carefully listening to people. So what are the things, I suppose, the drivers that people have installed? What's their operating system? Which bits are they really hanging on to because they totally think it's true about them? Which are the bits that can be gently challenged? Which are the bits we need to look at with some real compassion and kindness? Which are the bits that we can say, hang on a second, is that really the truth? Don't be ridiculous. And how we pull together all the strands of the story to be able to then develop the thing that we then move forward from. And of course, everybody's intentions or goals are different. I'm working with people who are either reducing, moderating, or drinking less as part of a harm reduction idea, and also people who are going for long-term sobriety, living alcohol-free, and they might be doing that for 3 months or a year, or they might be saying, that's it, I'm done with it for life, and I just need some support for right here, right now.
Yeah, back to that sort of unique piece where each of us is different and we need a way that works for our lives and our situation. I imagine that there are also some difficult feelings around when people decide to moderate or stop drinking alcohol. You mentioned before there was also some feelings around not being emotionally available for your children. And I could imagine that many people, they've maybe done things when they were drinking alcohol that they're not very proud of, or said things to people they love that they're not proud of. And at some point, they have to deal with that guilt or shame that comes up around that. So how do you work with these really difficult and often very deep-rooted and scary feelings that you might actually use alcohol to numb out instead of looking at them? How do you work with that with your clients to make sure that they can process that and actually move through that effectively?
I'm so glad you said the word process just then. For me, that really is the key. One of the things that I see on social media on a relatively regular basis, and it could just be the circles that I move in and what comes into my feed, but is this idea around learning to sit with your feelings. And there's this narrative that one of the best things about living a sober life is feeling your feelings. And also one of the worst things about living a sober life is feeling your feelings. And I remember in the really early days having a real, I suppose, negative set of thoughts around this idea of you've just got to learn to sit with your feelings, because I'm a human being who knows how to sit down. I'm a human being who got a pretty good handle on being able to give you a label for whatever the emotion might be, or near enough to what it might be. And learning to sit with it, I didn't understand, because if I go and sit in that chair over there and I recognise that I am angry or frustrated, and I sit with that emotion for a while, I don't know, what am I going to do? Put a timer on, sit for 5 or 10 minutes or whatever, and then get up and carry on my life feeling still frustrated or angry. That hasn't helped me at all. So really recognising and helping my clients to see, if we get a much better handle on the emotions, and we've got various different tools that we use together that are around helping, instead of thinking that something might be anger, what are the other words around anger? What are the other emotions that help us to just get to the nuance, help us to think about the thing that is why we might be feeling that way and understand a little bit more about it. And then what does processing look like depending on the emotion? So if I were to give you an example for me, when I am feeling, and my word would be a bit tetchy, I am somebody who really enjoys a proper stompy dog walk, the kind where I'm not walking casually, I am really moving that feeling through my body, and I get to shake it out a little bit and recognize that my nervous system needs that movement for that feeling. The nuance is all around the conversation of identifying the emotions. Somebody will really enjoy the brain-hand connection and will enjoy journaling. The next person will really enjoy talking out and telling a story and having somebody really listen carefully to their story and ask them the questions that really pull out the finer detail of it and get to what's going on for them. Somebody else will really enjoy that somatic movement, will enjoy the yoga. Somebody else will have something around meditation or music. So there's so many different tools that are accessible, and it's about almost having that knowledge, that library, that idea that if one thing doesn't work, hey, there's a whole bunch of other stuff, and we keep going and we find the right thing.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful and very empowering for the person wanting to move through this journey. So yeah, before we wrap up, I was wondering, how do you work with people who don't have a support system? You said you got kind of a mixed bag with your friends and family was mostly supportive, but what if someone feels like they're going to be judged harshly for making a decision to reduce or completely leave out alcohol? They might lose their friends, their family might not understand what they're trying to decide or why they're deciding that. Is it possible for people who don't have a support system to go on this path, and how do you support them in this?
Yeah, and I think isolation is one of those really heavy things to think about because, of course, this goes right back to how we were as cavemen. The most dangerous thing would be to have your tribe abandon you and to be left alone. You'd be open to anything could have happened to you. As human beings, that piece around feeling accepted, feeling loved, feeling wanted, feeling as part of the community is so important to us. With clients who really don't have an in real life support system, we look to very often where online stuff can be helpful. And certainly also it is around making new connections. And one of the things that really came as an enormous surprise to me is the number of new friends I have made since going down this path. If you'd have said to me at 40, oh, do you think you've got space for loads of new friends in your life? I might have said, oh, actually, thanks very much. I've probably got all the friends that I need. But I'm astonished to find myself now with an amazing array of people in my life who are in my life specifically because I have chosen not to drink. And these are people who I have either met in real life, in communities of people who there's AA, there's smart recovery, but there's also so many more different types of sober meetups that go on. And it's just about knowing how to and where to find these people because they absolutely are out there. It is about tuning in a bit more to your passion. And an example might be that 2 years ago, I did a pottery making class for a year. And so nothing to do with making pottery was ever about going for a drink afterwards. It was about having a cup of tea beforehand or whatever. Those places where you make new friends who have never known a version of you, whoever held a glass of wine in your hand is lovely. It's about helping somebody who might come to you feeling very exposed and isolated to find those ways that really give them the resources and the human beings around them that are going to make them feel not only entirely accepted, but celebrated. And we want to know in this world that we're making great choices and doing just the right thing for ourselves and for the people around us. And of course, there is always room to be surprised much later, further down the line. One of my really good friends who was a bigger drinker than I was is about to celebrate a couple of years alcohol-free because once I'd been doing it for a couple of years, she kind of thought she would just give it a go as well. So there's always room to be surprised in there.
Yeah, the ripple effect of the choices. Well, I do kind of see when people see the physical changes and I see some of the emotional changes, it makes them think about what role alcohol plays in their life and how they work with alcohol, how they use it in their lives. So I could see some people actually perking up and saying, maybe I should think about that. So yeah, that's very interesting. Now, Sarah, you work with clients on a regular basis on and around the topic of alcohol. So do you have programs or services that you offer around this? And how could our listeners work with you if they've been sort of really interested in this episode and they've connected with you on this topic and they might feel like they could use a little bit of support in their lives around this? How can they connect with you?
Thank you so much. I can be found at drinklesslivebetter.com. That's the website, and at drinklesslivebetter on Instagram. I wrote a book last year, which is also called Drink Less, Live Better, and available in all the places you can buy books. My podcast, also by the same name, is 5 to 8 minute episodes, really short episodes that are intended to really help out at that sort of 6 o'clock moment where you might be thinking, oh, shall I pour a glass of wine or not? So those little inspirational snippets that hopefully really do help somebody make a choice that they'll be happy about the next day, that's easily accessible. My programs I run entirely on Zoom, so with people anywhere in the world, and I'm only working with people one-to-one. So I tend to either do 1 month programs or 3 month programs. And then I do also have some clients who I see once a month on an ongoing basis. It's about really finding out what is exactly right for you, what support you need, what would be the right thing in the right moment, and also what changes over time. So some people, I might start off seeing them once a week for the first couple of months, and then we go to once a fortnight and then once a month. And that feels really nice for people, recognizing then that they are achieving, they are doing exactly what they said they wanted to do, but that support and accountability is still there. So yeah, one-to-one programs, and it's all at drinklesslivebetter.com.
Amazing. I see where you're going with the theme, the drink less, live better. So, perfect. And we, of course, will be linking to all of Sarah's offerings in the show notes as well. So be sure to check there for where you can find her book, connect up with her podcast. And if you are sitting there in the afternoon wondering if you should pour that glass of wine or you should have that beer or that shot, check out Sarah's podcast and have a listen to some of those bite-sized episodes and see how you feel after once you've listened to that. And if you still feel like pouring that glass, the whole drink less, live better theme seems to fit really, really well there. So yeah, be sure to check that out. And of course, if you end up working with Sarah, let us know what your experience was like. I'm always curious to find out how people connect after they've listened to a podcast episode, what they find has helped them in their lives, how they share that with others. So hit us up on Instagram, let us know, send us a message, and let us share your experiences so that others can have a look at that as well. And thank you so much, Sarah, for being here today with me and sharing your experiences, your wisdom, your story with us. It has been an absolute delight to have you here today, and I truly appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure today. So nice to be with you. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah. I look forward to maybe expanding on this in the future. I feel like there's so much left that we can still talk about. So thank you for today and take care. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to listen in. If you enjoy the Jōrni Podcast, please support us by subscribing, sharing on social media, and leaving us a review. We appreciate you. And you can find more of The Jōrni on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and our website, thejorni.com. Sending you love and courage, and see you next time.